Welcome to Covenant Security Solutions Lunch and Learn series. Covenant is pleased to host a forum on the latest around cybersecurity. We have provided topics to our community ranging from disaster recovery to privacy and upcoming trends in cybersecurity. So please be sure to make a note to join every third Tuesday of the month from 1 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern to get the latest insights in cybersecurity. So, before we begin, I want to provide a few house rules. We request that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation. This allows us to provide the greatest opportunity for our speaker to share their expertise and knowledge with you, given our limited time window. However, we don't want you to worry if you have questions. We always stop about 5 minutes to the end of the webinar to host any of your questions. If we don't get to your questions, please be sure to type them into the response form at the conclusion of the webinar, and we will ensure they are answered offline by our speaker. So today's topic is the CISO challenge. So we want to welcome all of you for taking time out of your day to come join us for this thought-provoking call to action. And this is going to be a challenge, I believe, that we're going to deal with going forward to maintain the integrity of the role of the CISO. And for those of you just joining us, a CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer, and the charge they have to keep this bar high for the next generation. So I'm going to invite you to buckle up your seatbelts for the next half hour. And we have a wonderful presenter today, Mr. Michael Phillips, who is the CISO at Rosenthal Collins. So, Michael, I'm handing it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Daniela. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time in the government community, and I'm really encouraged by this webinar and how it highlights many of the concerns and priorities with the CISO community. So, a brief introduction to give you guys a reason that you may want to listen to this at all. So, I've got my undergrad and MBA from Northwestern University, Kellogg being the MBA. I've got a series of former roles as CISO or Head of Information Security with the Federal Reserve Bank, Swiss Bank Corporation, and UBS. Quite a series of certifications, including the CISA, the CISP, the NSA's IAM piece, and most recently the EC Council's Certified Information Security Officer certification, as well as a member of several of the key groups, InfraGard, Chicago Electronic Crime Task Force, things of that nature. I think a profile was provided, and as well, there's my LinkedIn address at the bottom of the page for anyone that wants to dig in a little further to look at the background. For some perspective, I wanted to highlight an observation, though, and that is that I see the rise of the CISO today akin to the rise of the CIO back in the 90s. And at that time, there was so much pushback from others in the C-suite, generally the CFO, to not have the automation or IT person at the table with the business leaders. However, as business became more and more reliant on technology, and those that embrace technology as part of their strategic plan gained competitive advantage, many realized that the knowledge and expertise was essential at that level. So today I see the CISO role going through a similar ascension, and pushback has been at par, but oddly enough, it's not the relationship with the CFO as much as it is the CIO that's been interesting to watch. One would think that the CIO, having gone through what they did some 10, 15 years ago, would be mentors to the new CISOs and open to them mentoring opportunities on how they could develop the program and how they can actually be more effective in the boardroom and with the executive teams. But whatever the path and motivation, organizations embracing the CISO role, as a person that's been 20 plus years doing information security, I can tell you that this is definitely our time. I have here a quick survey I was hoping to do, but I don't think we're going to be able to get that done in the amount of time that we have. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about a survey that I typically give for this talk, and then I'll reference some of the feedback that we received from those surveys, but I'll quickly go over the questions that we have in that survey. So one is, how many folks listening are in the executive management role of information security, including the CISOs? For how many folks that raised their hands in that case, this would be the first CISO role that they've ever had. how many of those CISO roles would be the first CISO role at the organization that they're employed by, and how many of the CISOs had to manage through a breach, as well as how many of those CISOs actually report to the CEO. And we'll talk a bit about some of the responses that we receive every time we do this as I go through the rest of this discussion. But there's many variances to the role of CISO, and having worked as InfoSec in several organizations, I can tell you that no two of those roles were alike. The role of CISO takes on different meaning depending on many things, like what industry you're in, Fiserv, healthcare, manufacturing, the program's maturation level, be it nascent, evolving, compliance-driven, audit-intensive. But whatever the state, it takes different types of persons to manage and lead teams through the various stages of program development. If you think about the type of person it takes to start something from inception and build it up over time, compared to someone that has to keep it current and maintain it, it's not unusual for the CISO that begins a program in an organization to likely not be the one to see it to full maturation. However, for the sake of this discussion on the CISO challenge, I'm talking about the CISO who improves an organization's ability to mitigate risks, limits its exposure to security challenges, while still enabling the business to grow and remain operationally efficient, but also demonstrates professional leadership outside the confines of their respective organizations, and that benefits the CISO community at large. This is about being beyond the title and beyond the corner office. So to that effect, I intend to cover several key points in this discussion. Things I perceive to be challenges to the CISO, things to consider as you step into and mature the role within the organization, and lastly, to pose a challenge to all the CISOs here today. So as challenges go, whatever responsibility you have as CISO today, there'll be many things. It's not an easy job. At the Q. Okay. So security itself is a negative goal. It's difficult to show someone the value of something when it shouldn't actually happen. Further, it's easy to prove that someone can access something based on controls you put in place, but it's very hard to legitimately say that someone cannot, because there are many ways that it's possible to circumvent security. Consider the key targets and the many ways to compromise either. There's attacks on individuals, attacks on services, attacks on infrastructure. Here's our buddy Dave. So starting with people. People clicking on links, spear phishing, continue to be 90% of the issues. Programmers are writing applications unaware of risks with coding languages or the disciplines of secure coding. And too many executives still perceive it as just a technology problem. And size doesn't matter. At OPM, JP Morgan, large company breaches reveal it's not just a question of budget, but also of processes and skills. It demonstrates that there is still a lack of understanding of what security is and how it works. Consider technology. At its inception, the internet was not designed to be secure, but more to enable collaboration, etc. No one ever envisioned a $3 billion Cyber Monday as a possibility. The internet itself is a classic bolt-on after-the-fact security situation, where now there's a lot of tools out there to tackle and block, to prevent us from going to things, to let us know when things are happening, to detect and monitor. But technology has inherent risks that many technologies themselves fail to understand, and further exacerbates the challenges with bad or no cyber hygiene, i.e. patching, hardened config systems, no inventory in many cases. The bulk of our systems are very vulnerable, and even the best office is typically a patchwork of perimeter defenses, intrusion detection devices, etc. Patch and pray is still the dominant mode in many organizations. It's a balancing act. And when it comes to risk management, what's old is what's new again. That is, once identified, the most important risks get mitigated, minimized or accepted first, and then the next important risk goes next, and so on. But oddly, the focus on the highest risk overlooks the aggregate risk of low-level items, and many successful attacks leverage a sequence of low-level risks to be effective. They don't go after the high-level items. We have to be careful about managing risk versus measuring how much paperwork we've actually generated. The goal should be to identify what's going on in the environment and actually reduce the risk. An audit finding should not be the driver of this process, which happens in many situations when your program's primarily compliance-driven. Now, toss in the potential need for a cultural shift to effectively integrate information security disciplines. That can take a few years on its own, and it all sounds daunting, but there are successful programs, and they all have something in common. Upper management commitment and support. Security is actually integrated into the organization's strategic plans. Security is identified as a priority, that is properly staffed, properly funded, and integrated into operations. These are those disciplined processes, and this is cyber hygiene. And security is recognized as everyone's responsibility. So CISOs, we've got our jobs cut out for us, and it's good to be in demand, but there will be humbling times on this journey. And that's the breaches. One of the responses we'd always get back when we asked those questions in the beginning was how many folks had to manage through a breach, and very few hands would go up. But this slide tells a different story. There's a whole lot of breaching going on, and apparently nobody's being impacted by it. I got my notice from OPM this week alone. It's like the third notice I've gotten this year from very large organizations. But the positive side of that is I probably have the optional free credit monitoring 3 times more than anybody else does now. Given the number of breaches in the news, I'm certain there's a matter of course these days. But one of my most humbling experiences was dealing with a material breach on my watch. If you've not had to deal with one to date, it's an experience that I believe all CISOs need to manage through at some point. During that time, things can get fairly chaotic as you work to make the best of a bad situation. It's encouraging when response and recovery actually works as planned and tested. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to demonstrate good leadership under duress. That is, staying calm and focused, not throwing anyone under the bus, executing with purpose, and overly communicating. And in the end, even after all your efforts, you may still find yourself having to sit down and write 2 letters. Product vendors. I always ask my product vendors, this new magic tool that you sold me that's going to prevent me from all the threats, what's going to happen if, in fact, I do get breached? What's the standard response that these guys have when it was their tool that was in place and I may have missed something? And it's always interesting to get to note that response. If you haven't asked your vendors, you should probably ask. And as CISOs, many of you have been asked to sit on panels. I mean, everyone's calling to do a panel or do a discussion or webinar if you've been in the business for a while. And many of the challenges that CISOs talk about on those panels is, what keeps you awake at night? It's typically the I don't know what I don't know thing. What's the biggest risk of the future? 50 billion Internet of Things items coming. Biggest challenges you face today, there's no talent. What metrics do you report to the board? Primarily risk-based. And what technology you're currently deploying and why. And that typically depends on what state you are in the maturation of your program, whether you're doing baseline controls or you're doing things that are rather innovative these days. Some years back when I was participating on an InfraGard panel, if you're not familiar with InfraGard, they're a joint public-private partnership between the U.S. businesses and the FBI. We were asked about what we thought our biggest challenges were. And at that time, I spoke up and suggested that finding qualified folks to fill these roles was at risk. And it's a big challenge today. A couple weeks back, while attending a meeting on the Council of Global Affairs, an executive raised a viable concern related to technical folks being able to speak the language of the board. And though her point was viable, the way she expressed her concern, you'd think that she believes that there's a higher probability of finding the mythical unicorn than a CISO that can effectively communicate with the board. For many participating in today's webinar, the acronyms and issues all make sense, but outside, we've still got some work to do to get colleagues and other executives alike to understand the value of what we actually do as CISOs. This is a comment I found, a quote I found in Forbes magazine recently. They talked about a RAND Corporation study that estimates there are around 1,000 top-level cybersecurity experts globally versus the need for 10,000 to 30,000. So the question there would be, where does this other 20,000 come from, or 20+ thousand, right? I think that's right. And I'll elaborate on this a little bit, but the key CISO challenge today is that CISOs need to know their value. They need to appreciate those that came before and what they had to endure to get this role to this level, to get to the boardroom, to become peers at the C-level, to discuss things in business terms. We need to recognize our shared responsibility to make a more secure society for ourselves and our future generations as well. It's not just about the business. Right now, we have the opportunity to define what it is to be CISO, and more importantly, what it's not. I saw this same situation play out some years ago with network engineering, when GUI-based level 2 firewalls grew in popularity. And all of a sudden, anyone with a Nobel certification was considered a network architect or engineer. And I saw this just rows of folks get brought into these organizations to do network engineering, and a lot of the challenges that pursued after that. A key challenge for us today is to not let the CISO role be defined by the recruiters, the regulators, the product vendors, the hackers, or any other circumstance. Many of us have seen the peaks and valleys of InfoSec, but I believe this time is here to stay, particularly given the privacy and public safety matters that are so intertwined with data protection. For example, citizens are demanding that organizations apply a minimum level of due diligence to protect their private information and their health records. The ability to hack cars and municipal water filtration systems presents a serious public safety issue. It's anticipated that IoT device proliferation will be in the billions. Convergence and the impact of broader mobility, access to private information and health records, this is all going to keep this in the forefront going forward. And there's some really exciting times ahead for us, considering the advances in secure cloud architecture, fully automated monitoring and detection where systems are monitoring systems, self-healing applications where there's auto-patching of code, the integration of DevSecOps, programmable, repeatable security management, functional encryption, where now folks are computing on encrypted data, and more recently, safe harbor has been invalidated. There's a new EU-wide data protection law. What does all this mean to us? These are all new challenges we're going to have to face, and I'm actually looking forward to. So what's the ask? Again, leadership beyond the title and corner office. We need to bring these two masses together, information security and leadership. We need good CISO leaders to step up and mentor future CISOs that can take the mantle and carry it well. We need to leverage this momentum and this opportunity, get engaged outside of the walls of the organization, and join the CISO community. Get on the boards of directors of organizations outside of your industries and influence other senior leaders via volunteer boards and networking opportunities. Mentor young professionals. Allow them to learn vicariously through your experiences. They don't have to experience a breach. Tell them about your experiences. Stay current with new research and opportunities that the future holds in this space. Blaze the trail, but maintain the standard of the qualified CISO. Make it an aspiration beyond just the title for others on your teams. Some suggest that leadership is hard, but it's not about one's authority and power, but more about being the person you know you are in your heart. Speaking the truth from the heart. Being a dreamer. Being an enabler. Not being afraid to make mistakes, but encouraging others also to make mistakes. I talked about that breach, and I tell you, someone's always watching you. How you deal with people, how you deal with those issues, and how you deal with stress. And few things determine the quality of leadership than increased levels of duress. And most good leaders shine under pressure. Rosa Parks did not wake up that morning thinking, I'm going to be the catalyst of the civil rights movement. And maybe she was just tired, but it was a consequence of her doing what was in her heart at that time. And yes, it's unique for an individual to have such a broad impact on society, yet together, we can make a difference. But on a more personal level, things I find rewarding about being actively involved in the CISO community include when via networking events, I get to meet and share ideas with my colleagues, the pioneers as well as the new entrepreneurs in InfoSec. When students I've met as a guest lecturer embrace this path and seek guidance on mentorship, I have colleagues, Professor Yazgi and Professor Instrom at Northern University and at DePaul, and they afford us access to their students via their programs that they teach at the universities. When I see interns that work on our teams continue to do well in InfoSec and get placed in solid roles, which InfraGard and the DePaul internship programs enable us to do. When a vendor we took a chance on, as their first official customer years ago, ends up being the leader in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant. When I see others from my prior teams at other organizations join the ranks of senior information security executives, or even CISOs, we will be recognized by their peers as CISO of the Year. These are things that you can't put a price on, and the rewards are enduring. So, I know we're short on time here. No, actually, we're doing really good. So, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts about the role of CISO, the obvious challenge of the role, the challenges the future holds, and to pose a personal challenge to each of you as you take on these roles. And in closing, I ask, as a CISO, what legacy will you leave behind?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael. I want to open up the floor to questions now. Feel free to raise your hand, or you can type in questions and I can provide that to Michael and he can give you some responses. So while we're waiting, Michael, one thing that came through to me in your presentation is this real big push around leadership. And that to me seemed like the greatest quality that should be aspired to as a CISO. And, when you look at a lot of the things that are coming out and you're saying the recruiters and others aren't defining it, a lot of people are looking for that purely, really strong technical person. But, if I'm listening correctly, it sounds like to me that that balance has to be there. You have to communicate. You have to have that ability to have people follow you in order to get the organization where it wants to be. So, I guess I want to hear some more of your thoughts about that.
No, I totally concur, and I think technical leadership is very good probably at a particular level within the CISO organization, within the information assurance organization, but we've got other things outside of just the technical piece that we try to also get folks on the team. We got good project managers that are doing some really good work up front in getting, with the business and functional requirements, security requirements in that whole process of getting the project done, making sure that those requirements are actually met and there's requirement traceability happening at the end, and then also the UAT ensures that the security is integrated into the solution. That's kind of outside the purview of the tech person per se, but it's kind of managed through the assurance program. The same with business contingency. There are key elements of a business impact analysis where we may identify the recovery time objectives of what we expect for our critical systems to be back up, but there's so much more about getting people from our primary location to our secondary location, making sure they're set up, making sure everything's working, that is kind of outside an IT area as well. So I think definitely, and I can probably poo-poo this a little bit because I do have a solid technical background, but at the same time, you can't get in the room with a lot of executives and board members and talk tech. I mean, I am nowhere near as technical as most of my colleagues are, but I'm probably the most technical in the room that I'm in when I'm doing discussions with our executive team, and I have to convey that technical talk into something that means something to the folks in the room about the business, impacts to the business, why certain things that from a technical perspective may seem rather crazy to us, but in fact it may have minimal impact to what we're trying to do as a business. We may be able to accept a lot of those risks. And in my former role as an assessor, I used to come back and tell folks, listen, those are a lot of technical items there, but we can manage those, or we can mitigate them, or you know what, we don't even have to worry about those, we can tolerate them because the impact to the operation is minimal. And someone has to be able to make that translation, and I think that may exceed some of the capabilities of our really, really strong technical folks.
Okay. And that's, you made an excellent point that would kind of segues into my next question. As the leader really in the organization of helping people carry and understand what needs to happen to bring about a strong information security program, how do you translate it from technical to non-technical? How do you get people to understand that risk? Because I think oftentimes when we go around to organizations, we find that it's even the conversation we had today would probably be very, very deep. in terms of getting people to understand what their risks are and how that affects their bottom line and what they can do in that process. So if you could share some keys, I guess, of wisdom of how you've done that in your organizations that you've worked for and something that other CISOs can you possibly utilize to help them in their organizations.
Well, one of the key things that I suggest is with any risk process is first you have to do the assessment, determine what risk exists out there, and then you have to then classify those and prioritize them on how they're going to get addressed or managed, mitigate, tolerate, or totally get rid of them. The goal should be to get rid of them in most cases. Of course, you look at it based on cost as well as other potential values like your reputation, things of that nature, and all that goes into weighing how you address that risk. But if nothing else, if you can only mitigate it and monitor it rather effectively, I mean that's a way of managing it as well. Excuse me. But one of the things I always tell folks when I go out and do assessments is one, let's identify what your crown jewels are. What data is absolutely important to you? What data must you have in order for your operation to run? And what would happen if that data is not there? And then we talk about scenarios around, if that data is unavailable, what we do to address that situation. What do we do to mitigate that risk and on? And so we kind of highlight where we're going to focus. We make sure that anything that's considered critical data, we put appropriate controls around that one. We don't do a big focus on a lot of the public data, things of that nature. We classify this information. We make sure that the controls that we put around it are proportional to the risk there. And then we look at the rest of the organization. We make sure we get general training in place, particularly if we have to do a culture shift. And we put processes in place that enable us to ensure that folks are doing the right things as they need to. That's all part of the program as well. But then when we go and we present risk to our executives, it is in the context of the other risks, the reputational risk, the financial risk, the margin risk for our business, the trading risk, and then when I bring up these items from the InfoSec side of the house, it's looked at relative to all of these other things. And if there's something that's going to impact, how we trade or how we clear or customer information, then those would be the three things that would trigger for us internally here. And then we talk about controls around those, and then where we may have some areas to focus.
Right. That's excellent. I just wanted to remind everybody we still have the floor open for questions. We were able to move pretty quickly through the presentation, so feel free to, you can even raise your hand here on the sideline. But I did want to also piggyback off the very last comment you were making. It sounds like how you really approach this is to first understand the business and understand the business process and what has the biggest impact. And you're able to then garner the support you need from being able to identify it to something that matters to everyone. Is that?
That's quite correct. In fact, okay. I think too often it's always perceived as a technology challenge. We look at it from a technology perspective, but in fact, if the business is impacted, there's no business, no technology, no technology. There's no point in all this, right?
Right.
So, yeah, we always look at it from the perspective of how will it impact the business and those key areas of our business that need to be operational at all times. And then the cyber risk is looked at just like all the other risks and compared accordingly.
Excellent. I guess we have a quiet crowd today, so this is going to be my final question. You mentioned about the gap that we have in terms of finding qualified talent. As a CISO, how are you able to mitigate that gap in your organization? How are you able to sort of continue to keep your processes moving forward, even though you probably know you could use another 6 or 7 people that have a specific skill set that you probably aren't going to find on the market?
Well, I have to be honest. Here in the Midwest, we have a couple of offline CISO groups that get together on a regular basis, both formally and informally. And between us, we actually know most of the folks in our industries, most of the really good analysts, most of the really good architects and engineers. And so they typically go from one organization to the other, depending on what's happening out there in the market. So we were doing information sharing well before FSISAC and these folks figured out it was a good idea to do information sharing. But the challenge there is a lot of CISOs would not share information. It's kind of like the InfraGard relationship where that sharing was typically one-sided. The business would share with the FBI, but we didn't get a lot of information back, and now they've kind of adjusted and they share a lot more with us as well. But that sharing enables our CISO in the Midwest to actually know what's going on, know who's doing what. We also work with a lot of the professors at the universities. We get in there, we look at the interns that are coming up. We kind of embrace a few of those folks. My last 3 hires, I think, were interns right out of one of the programs at the universities. And then we bring them in, we nurture them up, we give them the basics, what an analyst should do on a day-to-day basis. We enable them to bring those issues to us and chat with us about what they should do or what they should not do. And we have a second level more mature analyst here that can work with them. And then when we do a lot of the projects, we involve them in all of these things so they understand that it's not just about the technology, but it's about what we do on the contingency side, what we do on the project side, and how security integrates and all that. So we nurture them. They always get poached, don't get me wrong. Right. We get them 2.5, 3 years, and someone gets them. But at least we've done our part of that bargain, and we've trained them up well. We've got them good, and when they get out and they get going, likely I'll get them back in here, and we'll do some more work with them later on.
Oh, excellent. So it's really mentoring, a lot of mentoring. So that's absolutely wonderful. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you have any questions that you think of after we hop off the line, feel free to put that into the comment section. And I also want to encourage you to join us in January. We will be having a third Tuesday of the month. We'll be having Dr. Mansour Hasib talk about the outlook for healthcare in 2016 as it relates to cybersecurity. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Michael. It was absolutely a pleasure. You shared so much wisdom. I know this is going to be on repeat for a lot of people once we get it posted. So thank you so much. All right, everyone. See you next time.